last night. So first of all, thank you for having me in Connecticut. I lived here when I was a little girl. Please don't ask where, because I don't remember where. So it's almost very nostalgic to come back, because I haven't been back in a long time. But today I really want to talk about a can-do mindset, and what does that really mean for our classroom? I think when we hear can-dos, we automatically all think of the can-do document from ACTFL, which really guides us in our work and our practice, and that trait. However, there's more to it than just a document. So today I really want to look at these three things for you all. Can we explain how mindset affects learning? It's a really big deal. There's a lot of research around it. You've probably heard of Carol Dweck. She's the leading researcher from Stanford, but now there's a whole host of others that are following in her steps, trying to figure out grit and what develops grit and what does a growth mindset really mean. Can we justify why a can-do mindset is critical to language learning? Because it's absolutely critical to getting kids to buy in and to move forward with usable real-world skills. And then what does that can-do mindset look like in a classroom? So today and this morning, I hope to really validate some of your thinking. Some of the things that you're going to hear, you've probably heard before. It's not new news. But hopefully you hear it again and you take it from maybe a different perspective. Because I think each time we circle around to something, we're at a different place in our lives, and so we hear it with slightly different ears. I hope to challenge your thinking this morning, and probably even I will make you uncomfortable at some point. There are lots of things that are going on in our world today, and we all have different views of what that is, and there's not a right or a wrong. They just are our views. But we have to think about how those affect things that go on in our classroom. I don't expect that you'll all agree with me today, but I hope that you'll at least take the moment to consider some of the things that we'll bring up. So how does mindset affect learning, and what does that mean for my students? We're going to watch this video real quickly just so that we're all on the same page.
Carol Dweck uses the term mindset to describe the way people think about ability and talent. Dweck delineates between two different mindsets.
Oh boy.
And unchangeable. The second is a growth mindset, which views it as something you can improve through practice. In a fixed mindset, you view failure as permanent, but with a growth mindset, you see failure as a chance to learn and even pivot. Those with a fixed mindset are more likely to view critical feedback as a personal attack, while those with a growth mindset will see it as a chance to improve, where they can develop new systems. With a fixed mindset, you're more likely to choose easier tasks and put in minimal effort. After all, if talent is fixed, why bother improving? Why even try? But with a growth mindset, you're more likely to embrace challenging tasks and work hard to improve. Those with a fixed mindset are likely to give up when they face an obstacle. Meanwhile, those with a growth mindset will view obstacles as a chance to experiment and solve problems. In a fixed mindset, the focus is on measurable accomplishments. But with a growth mindset, the focus is more on a journey of continual improvement. With a fixed mindset, you're less likely to take creative risks. But with a growth mindset, creative risks are simply a way to innovate and improve. Ultimately, your mindset influences everything from creative risk-taking to how you view feedback to whether or not you finish difficult tasks. And in the end, it's one of the greatest factors in determining whether or not you grow and improve in your abilities.
So I found this, and I thought it was a really great kind of summary, because I feel like I could identify with students in my classes that met both of these, right? The kids that had the fixed mindsets that were like, I can't do this. I can't speak funny. Why are we doing this again? To the more serious ones of when will I ever use this in my real world? I do work in a large urban district, so the opportunities for kids to get outside of their neighborhoods are often very challenging for many of the kids that we teach. So when it comes to this idea of a fixed mindset, it's very much ingrained in many of them when they come in the classroom. And it seems like all of education now is starting to look at how kids learn and what they do from a growth perspective. Now even on our student achievement test, there are still growth targets that kids are supposed to meet annually. And that's a trend across the country. I think it's because a lot of times we can't affect how kids come to us. We receive them as they are. right? We can point fingers and we can say what other teachers didn't do and what they didn't get at home. It's really a waste of your time, and it doesn't make you feel any better, because it is just reality. So if we look at where kids are, if we approach it from a growth mindset, then it's not a deficit. It's really an opportunity to grow. It's just the opportunity of saying, if we don't know where we are, then how do we grow? So it does take some courageous conversations, and it takes teachers to be courageous first and foremost, because we have to identify who we are and what we believe in the classroom before we start working with kids on the spectrum from the Mikeys to give it to me, I'll try it, I'll do it, to the ones of why am I even here? So really, what I want to ask you, and this is, I'm not going to ask you to out yourself in any way, but I want you to think about, what do you believe about the capacity of students to learn languages? Are you born with that capacity?
Yes.
Or can it be developed?
Yes.
Right, I hear a lot of people going, yes, both. So I would challenge you to think for a moment, has anyone ever heard of this athlete named Michael Jordan? Raise your hand if you've heard of him. How many of you, raise your hands if you would say you think he was born with a talent to be a fabulous basketball player? Then why is it that the first 6 times he tried out, he couldn't get on a team? Anybody heard of Fred Smith? He's one of our local favorites in Memphis. He's the owner of FedEx, so you might have heard of FedEx if you haven't heard of Fred. So Fred Smith wrote about FedEx in his graduate work and was failed twice by being told that it was completely ludicrous and it would never happen. He did go bankrupt twice, but the 3rd time was a charm. So I think when we really think about what are we born with versus what can be grown, the measure that's in between is about effort. But our beliefs about it are what changes it. If we believe that we are born with a finite capacity to learn things, I'm either smart or I'm not. I'm a good language learner or I'm not. I would harbor to say that everybody's a good language learner. We're great at code switching. And some of our most urban children are the most talented code switchers that you will ever meet. But yet we look at them with a deficit mindset, because they don't come speaking perhaps the way we want them to or acting the way we think is politically correct or acceptable within that context. But they fluidly, given the right markers and clues, can code switch and morph and change in their different environments. It's a very sophisticated understanding, but it's about how we approach that understanding and how we use it. I would venture to say that, when we get babies, it's about what do we expose them to? So kids that grow up, like my son, he's my own personal experiment. God love him. He's 14 and he's in Spanish 3 and French 2 and Latin's on its way, whether he likes it or not. Apparently it's a battle in our household. But it's funny because Spanish he finds to be very easy for him because it was his first language. Now, when he got to kindergarten, he was gifted and he was a behavior problem because when he was bored, he was that kid that climbed the walls. Not disrespectful necessarily, but he climbed the walls. So it's every teacher's nightmare, especially if you're in an inclusion class. So then you have him start taking French, and he doesn't like it. It's hard. No, it's not hard. You actually have to do something for it. In Spanish, you listen and you get it, right? You have flashbacks to when I yell at you in Spanish. Maybe even slight side effects. But, he twitches a little. In French, he had to actually apply himself. We had to learn how to learn French. Now he's doing extremely well with it and loves it. Now he doesn't want to take Latin because he wants to take another year of French, or 2 more years of French. So I think it's about what we expose them to when they're little. It's not so much that I think he was born with this capacity to be in language, but that's where my fascination has been since he was born. I've been the language geek about how do I get to be a better teacher? How do I help teachers be better? Bless his little heart, he got drugged to every PD session that I had in some of my classes when I was still teaching, in his car carrier. I'd go to get him at lunch and he'd sit there for some period. He's been immersed in language from the very beginning. So there are kids that are immersed in different things. I think of students that grow up with parents that are doctors or are lawyers, right? That kind of thinking gets cultivated from very young. So I would challenge you when we say that we think that we're born with capacities. We're born with the capacity to learn. The question is what have we been exposed to? Because when we look at people like Fred Smith and we look at people like Michael Jordan, the difference is about the effort. the willingness to fail, the willingness to pick themselves up after they fail and try again. So those are the sorts of things that we have to cultivate in our students. We have to create an environment where it's okay to make a mistake. Because quite frankly, we all make them. And if we didn't make mistakes, no one would like us. We probably wouldn't like ourselves much either. But you wouldn't learn anything. And it's only through making mistakes and falling short that we actually learn and grow. So if that's true, then my next question would be can we define, what a model world language user looks like? What does a language practitioner look like? Can we define that? Because I'll tell you what, there are lots of other content areas that are trying to figure this out. And I think that this is where we have a leg ahead, because we can define it. We can identify what a language practitioner looks like at varying levels. We have that how well defined for us, and that's a gift. Because there isn't another content area that has that. They're all struggling to figure it out through standardized tests and through tier 1 interventions and response to intervention and all these other things that you hear every day that makes you want to bang your head against the wall because they don't know what how well looks like. We're still trying to figure that out, but we know. And I think philosophically, we all agree. The goal is to teach kids how to communicate, right? How to interact, hopefully in a culturally appropriate manner. Because if you offend someone, you really can't communicate. So do you believe that anyone can become the model if that model is defined? And that's the And this comes from Tell, like I have no problem saying this, because I believe that kids can become the model just like teachers can become the model. If we have defined what we're looking for clearly and we've shared that with students, then we should be spending our time equipping them with strategies to achieve it, to reach those growth markers, to reach those benchmarks. It's not about being born with capacity, it's about working towards it. So all of these people seem to think that the model can be achieved. So this is a list from Language Testing International of all of their corporate partners. To get a job or to get a promotion in one of these businesses, you have to take an OPI or a WPT. So I would argue, in our district, we talk a lot about college and career readiness. Does anybody else talk about that in their districts? Okay, we can't escape it. What I've said to my teachers for years is that being college and career ready is about proficiency. If all of these companies are asking for these skills, then this is the industry standard. It has been defined for us. So if we're going to get our kids there, we have to embrace it. And we have to embrace it from the perspective that when we talk about college and career ready, this is it. The proficiency guidelines are what we're working towards. So if we can all agree that we want to educate students to be communicators and to be proficient communicators, and we all can agree on what how well looks like, then it really should be a hop, skip, and a jump to creating kids that communicate at those levels. But the question comes in to what do we do as teachers? And this is where it gets tricky. So I would argue that a can-do mindset in a classroom means being conscious. It means being deliberate, intentional. It doesn't mean waking up and pulling something out of the folder because that's what I've always done for this chapter. There's beauty in that, and I don't knock it. I'm all about working smarter, not harder. But does that activity meet the needs of your current kids? Where are they currently in their development or on their path to proficiency? And is that activity going to get them closer to the target or not? It also means that we have to be conscious about these three things. And they are pervasive in our world today. So we have to be clear about what our biases are. We have to be conscious of deficit thinking and how that affects our classroom. And we also have to be very conscious about binary thinking. So let's look at each one of them briefly. First and foremost, we all have to understand that we are biased. We live in a system that is biased. This is where we start pushing boundaries. There is such a thing as white privilege. None of us asked for it. But if your skin is white, you probably have it. I didn't understand that until I married a Hispanic man and changed my last name. I can now tell you that the treatment I get when someone does not see me and judges me by my last name is very different from when I walk through a door or I speak to someone on the phone. And it's markedly different. I didn't understand that until I went through it. I didn't understand, it's hit home in a whole new way. My son, who is half Mexican, half everything else that I am, white, he never identified himself as Latino until this school year. And it broke my heart and shocked me at the same time. So much so that it'll now be it'll be the theme of my dissertation research. He's a gifted kid. He always has been. We were blessed to be given a child that is very bright, somewhat, in many ways, much brighter than me or his father. However, what that means is that he's been surrounded by people that don't necessarily look like him. And while he's in those groups, his friends have always been Hindi, Asian, African American, more non-white than white. They're playing soccer at lunch, and it suddenly hit him that, wait a minute, this is a part of me. So I just say that, and I understand that we all have different views and we all have different opinions. But when you walk through the door, the experiences that you've had in your life have led you to think a certain way. And much of that is unconscious, because that's just the way you were raised, and we were raised within a bias system. There's not a way that any one person is going to necessarily change that system. But there are ways that we can be conscious about it, and we can be conscious about how our actions and how we choose to act and react in situations. So deficit thinking is huge in education, right? It's the kids' fault. Scores aren't high enough, it's the kids' fault. We don't have enough money in the schools. Well, it's the kids' fault because they went to the charter schools, or they went to the private schools because they're not happy, right? It's this idea that everything is wrong is linked to the child, and that's usually linked to race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status. Kids are kids, guys. They come to us to be molded, to be groomed, and they are subject to the experiences that they have been provided in their lives. Some of those experiences are heart-wrenching. I remember in my third year of teaching, I had a student come in. He was one of the biggest thugs in the school and was proud of it. He came in and he put his head down on my desk, and I thought, oh God, here we go. So that day, though, I had been in my graduate classes, and somebody had said, just talk to the kids. Just pull them out in the hallway and talk to them. And I thought, oh, let's try it. Let's see if it works. So I'm like, Dante, come out in the hallway. And of course, all the kids are like, and I'm like, so y'all do your work. So we got in the hallway, and I'm like, now, Dante, why are you acting like this? This isn't like you. Wrong. It's always like him. But I'm going to fake it till I make it, right? Okay, Dante, I believe the best in you. Why are you putting your head down? Like, I really can't go here today. The baby didn't sleep. And there are lots of other things in my life going on. Why do you have your head down? And the tears built up in his eyes. And I went, uh-oh. He looked at me and said, you know, Miss Justina, I'm so sorry. But I didn't sleep last night because my mom's boyfriend was beating her and had a loaded gun. And told me that if I came out and tried to help her, he would shoot her first and then shoot me. So I spent the night in the closet until this morning. It had been quiet long enough that I dared to go out and see what had happened. So they took my mom to the hospital, and I came to school because I didn't know what else to do. Wasn't expecting that at all. Obviously, 20 years later, it's affected me in a way that has made me go, ooh. And I can tell you from friends that teach at very well-to-do private schools to schools in the hood, things happen that we can't even fathom in everybody's homes. Doesn't matter what side of the tracks, doesn't matter where you live. Kids bring baggage to school every day. We can't blame the kids. We have to look at how can we reach them. Our job is to broker the resources and the tools to help them be successful. And it's serious because kids do have so much more baggage today than we ever had growing up. And part of that is accessibility, and part of that is just the world that we live in and the examples that are being set nationally and internationally. You know, we live in a time where kids have a lot on their shoulders that we didn't necessarily have. We had the luxury of going out until the street lights came on and we had to come inside. You know, we don't do that these days. So I just would challenge you to think in your classroom the next time something comes up. Call yourself, check yourself, be conscious. Am I blaming the student because that's what's easier? Or is there another way to look at it? And I think that this happens because of this idea in our society about binary thinking, right? It's either right or it's wrong. It's either good or it's bad. It's really not. It's really about shades of gray, and I don't mean the movie. No, way more than 50 Shades. But I mean, it is about, the last one on here is one of my favorites. It's about proficiency or grammar. Wrong. It's about both. Grammar is an intricate part of communication. It's just where, when, and how much, right? So we've been raised in this society about, you know, it's the black and white binary, it's the good and bad, it's the, it's right or it's wrong. I mean, think about any number of things that go on, right? Even inside, right, it's in or it's out. And this comes actually from computing and data analysis. It comes from stocks, where binary codes really are 1 or 0. But that's not the way the world works. That's the way a computer works. Because there's a finite number of options, because it doesn't have the privilege of thinking yet. So a can-do mindset means being intentional. It means checking ourselves at the door and being able to say, this is where I can interrupt the cycle. So the proficiency scale is where we started, because it's unbiased. It is applicable to everybody, whether you're in elementary school or you're in the business world. It's fair. It's non-subjective. It's either did I see it or did I not? Did you link the sentences together or did you not? Did I get a paragraph? And I don't mean 5 sentences, I mean 5 interrelated sentences, not just 5 sentences. So we also have to look at principles of proficiency. And those are as follows. We're going to go through them one by one. There's 4 of them, right? But so language learning is characterized by what learners do with what they know. We're great at teaching stuff. And quite frankly, we love, most of us, to pull apart the grammar and the mechanics and look at how cool it is and how you can, like, we geek out. It's okay. That's who we are. We're geeks. And we can embrace that because we liked it so much we're doing it full time, right? We liked high school so much we went back to spend the rest of our lives there. Or middle school or elementary school. It's okay. So if we're going to ask students what they can do with another language, if we're going to focus on that, these are the things that you do. You can speak to another person or people. You can write something, whether that be an email, a tweet, a snap. I'm trying to be hip. A letter. Right? Like, I don't know how Snapchat works. It still makes my head hurt. But that's how kids communicate. Instagram, Snapchat. I mean, that's what their little world is. You can read ads, books, stories, emails, tweets. You can listen to others. You can listen to voicemails. But when it comes down to what do we do with language, these are the things that we do. So how do you do these things in your classroom? How do they come alive in your classroom? How do you apply what you're teaching them, the know, to be able to do this better? To do it more efficiently? To do it more proficiently? A proficiency continuum drives pacing, instructional repertoire, and assessment practices. So if we're looking at the proficiency guidelines, how does that drive everything we do? In our district, we talk about the path to proficiency. And we all talk about where we are on the path. And quite frankly, I'm still on the path. I like to share that with kids 20, 40 years later. I still wouldn't call myself fluent in Spanish. I know where I rank on the OPI scale, and I'm not distinguished or superior, so I'm not fluent. I reach a point where I have to stop and think about what words are going to come next. And at that point, I feel like that's not fluent yet. And that's just my realistic view. But so it takes a target. It takes where on the path to proficiency are we? You know, where are we headed? Where are we now? Where are we going? It's that growth mindset. There's room for everybody on your chart. Differentiating targets with kids is a great way of differentiating without having to do 14 different lesson plans. Because it's about output. It's about what students do with what they know. And the students that can do more with what they know should. We should push them to that higher proficiency level. So if you're a level 1 teacher and your goal is intermediate low, okay, don't freak out. In our district, it's intermediate low for honors kids. Because kids do it. They do it regularly. It's not as hard as we think it is. You just have to be intentional. But the kids that are applying off the charts, we do have a group. We have our second group right now of 7th graders that are taking level 2 in 8th grade. And last year they took the stamp assessment and they were all intermediate mids. Every one of them, after 1 year of instruction. But it's because the teacher was intentional. Now, what we know is that the first group that's sitting in level 3 right now, they're still intermediate mids. They peaked early. They got there, but they're building that out, right? Once you get there, you kind of hang out in intermediate mid for a while. And so yeah, we have some I4s and we have some teetering on I5. It's okay. But they're there because they're building to go out. And we're expecting that by the end of level 3, the beginning of level 4, they're going to pop up into that intermediate high. So that by the time they get to advanced placement, there is no doubt that they're walking out with 5s. And these are kids that are not going abroad. They're not doing any of this in the summer. They're just kids. But the teachers have found ways to intentionally craft their practice that pushes kids forward. And we're going to talk about what a couple of those things are in the session later today. So classroom-based language performances along the continuum lead to the development of proficiency. So everything we do in our class should help kids get better. It should help kids move up this path. So there are all these different options for performances in your classroom. I'm going to argue with you, and you don't have to agree with me, but these are the 3 that are important, most important. Because you have to be able to understand what somebody says or understand what you read in order to answer something. So do I need to explicitly test interpretive reading in a summative manner? If I've been doing it all along, probably not. And if you're in level 1 or level 2, the beginning of level 2, presentational speaking is painful. I mean, I love them. God love them. Bless their little hearts, but it's painful. I'd rather you spend your time on interpersonal speaking. It takes time to do interpersonal speaking. It takes time to put kids together. In our district, our teachers do an interpersonal interview with every child twice a year. But we built that into the curriculum. We built that into the pacing. So we made some hard hits about, no, we're not doing the past tense at the end of level 1. I know some of the level 2 teachers are freaking out right now. We don't. We introduce chunks. We put it up on a grammar wall. Kids have access to it, so if they're ready, they'll get it. But we needed to create space for kids to intentionally move up the continuum. And it takes about 3 weeks a year. It takes about a week at the beginning of the year and about 2 weeks at the end. So we always do the 3rd week of school is all about assessment, and then the week before spring break, because we find after spring break everything goes haywire. No one identified with that. So then performance and feedback are focused on moving students along the continuum. So the things we ask students to do, the feedback we give them is all focused on moving them along the continuum. Because I promise you, if you go in and you dissect the proficiency guidelines, it's all there. Your grammar is there, your accuracy is there. You can't get B in intermediate if you can't conjugate a verb, folks. Does that mean we have to have them conjugate every regular AR, ER, and IR verb just to prove that they can do it? No. But we need to teach them how. We need to give them access to the structures. And then we need to make it readily available in our classrooms so that you don't have to be the sole purveyor of knowledge. We have to move away from being the know-it-all in the classroom. We have to give kids access to the information that they need, so when they need it, they don't need you. They need to know how to use it. So how do you move kids along the continuum? It's really very easy. First and foremost, you set a target. I don't care if no one else in your building has a target. You in your classroom can set a target for your students. Is it more powerful when your school sets targets, or your district, or your state? Yes. But there's no need to wait on other people. Like, if you're ready to make the leap, make the leap. There is no formula to doing it right. You will make mistakes, And you will inevitably get better every time you do it. Set a target. If you don't have something to work for, you'll never get there. If you haven't identified where you're headed, you're not going to get there. You're just going to meander. The other thing is to understand the difference between proficiency and performance. So proficiency are these things, right? You guys all know this. It's real world. It's unrehearsed. It's any topic that might come up, right? You run into somebody in the grocery store, they're going to ask you a question. You're on the street in the country that's where you are, and somebody's going to ask you a question. They're going to assume you can answer it. I don't know. I was in Little Russia. I was in New York City going to Russian bookstores for my Russian teachers, and some woman walked up to me on the stairs and addressed me in Russian. I looked at her, I was like, I couldn't even say I don't speak Russian. I'm really good at saying like I don't speak French or I don't speak German. But Russian wasn't one that I had gotten yet. And I just looked at her, I was like, I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian. What? You don't speak Russian? You look Russian. I'm like, no, thanks. Hanging out down here in New York. I understand I have my arms full of Russian books, but I don't. So those are things that are going to happen to you in real life, wherever you might be, right? Performance is the simulation of those things. It's things that we practice. It's things that we hone. And it's designed to help kids yield a proficiency level. We don't do proficiency in our classrooms, we do performances. We don't assess for proficiency. The only people that assess for proficiency are ACTFL certified testers. We replicate that. We seek to replicate that. And that's exactly what we should be doing. But what we have to get kids to understand is that performance, that one individual performance, was at an intermediate level. That does not mean you're an intermediate. Right? But what we want kids to understand is the more you give me of performances at intermediate mid, the more likely it is that you are an intermediate mid. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the more we target and hone practice, the more we ask kids to perform at a specific level, and we teach them how to do it, the more likely it is that their proficiency is going to be there when they take that proficiency assessment. Your performance, students will perform in your classes higher than their proficiency level. It makes sense, right? So when you set your targets, set them high because you're teaching kids to perform there. When they take that proficiency assessment, they're going to be slightly lower. And that's what we want. So yes, I want all of my level 1 teachers freaking out that I want them all their kids to be at intermediate low at the end of the year. You know what? The majority of my kids sit at novice high in my standard classes and my non-honors classes. I'm okay with that. But before we set an intermediate low target, we had lots of novice lows and novice mids. And that's not okay with me. I don't ever want kids to come out of a classroom speaking in broken sentences. And ultimately that's what a novice is. It's someone that can't put a sentence together. So our target is always in the intermediate realm. So push yourselves. Set your own targets for your classroom, even if the rest of your department isn't on board. Because what's going to happen is you're going to turn out these kids that are amazing. And people are going to go, holy smokes, what's going on over there? Then it's not about the battle. It's not about the old school versus new school, right? It's getting out of that binary, right? The right, the wrong, the proficiency, the grammar. We're not having those discussions. Now we're having this discussion of how do we serve the kids that I've just served you? So these level 1 kids that have gone to my high school, or my level 2 kids that have gone to the high school, they're bored out of their minds right now. Because the level 3 high school kids aren't at the same spot. And the conversation that's going on in that building is why not? And it's because the high school teachers didn't buy into the targets. They thought they were too high. Until kids, young kids, got there proving them wrong. Challenge yourselves. Set high targets. Because growth happens on a continuum. It occurs in partnerships with the students. You can't do this for the students. The students have to do this work. And we work ourselves to death trying to make it happen. And unfortunately, the person who does the most work does the most learning. So you guys are fabulous. It identifies a goal and it works towards it. And it's dependent on intentional feedback. This is life, ladies and gentlemen. This is no different in an English class or an AP Human Geography class. It's no different. Like, this is life. These are life skills These are soft skills that you're teaching kids, how to set a goal and work towards it, how to persevere despite they might not make it the first time. That's developing grit. It's interesting because there's a graduate student that just came out of Stanford that worked with Carol Dweck, and she's researching on grit. And she did research studies with students and in businesses of highly successful people. They isolated their background, their socioeconomic status, their education level, all of these things. And what they found was that the one thing that made a difference in success was grit, which is the ability to persevere. They don't know how it was taught. They don't know how these people have learned it. It's kind of the next road of research going down with the growth mindset is how do we develop that grit? And I think that part of that is showing kids that it's okay to fail as long as you're failing forward. You don't fail unless you don't learn from it. If you've learned from it, then it wasn't a failure, it was an opportunity to learn. If you fail from it and repeat it again and again and again, okay, then it was a failure because you didn't learn from it. So in your classrooms, before you say a word, you have to answer this question. Because we deal with kids at the most vulnerable times of their lives. Raise your hand if you teach high school. Okay. So those of you who just raised your hand, this is especially geared to you. Middle school, kids are hateful in middle school, right? Middle school teachers, God love you, they should give you a bonus. Because middle schoolers don't like themselves, much less anybody else. And God forbid they're 8th graders, because then they think they know everything, and they don't like themselves or anybody else. And no one can tell them anything. So we really have to address this. Have we created a safe environment? Because what we're asking kids to do ultimately is fail in front of others, publicly. And not just others, in front of their most vulnerable group, their peer group. So we're asking them to take risks. We're asking them to sound funny. We're asking them to do things that feel maybe unnatural to them, publicly, with their peers, who can then make or break the rest of their lives, in their minds. So we have to celebrate the kids that take risks. We have to celebrate the goofballs in class that aren't afraid to make a fool of themselves. Make them your examples. I really need your help today. I need you to help make the other kids feel comfortable. Will you do this with me? I don't care. Well, once they get up and do it, once you have a couple of kids get up and do it, everybody else will follow in suit. But how do you create that environment? How do you explicitly say to kids, I don't care what your reputation is. When you come through my door, you'll create your reputation with me based on how you act with me and we interact. I don't care what the rest of the school says about you. But I do care about you enough to say that what happens in this classroom stays in this classroom. That we're all going to be risk takers. That we're not going to make fun of people who make mistakes. Like those are things that we're not going to tolerate. So if we're going to have class rules, they're going to be around this idea of risk taking and about being respectful to one another. They're going to be about bigger things than they are about having my pencil and my paper headed correctly. And I mean, those are procedures and they're important. Not knocking them. But when we get into what are your non-negotiables? And your non-negotiables really have to get into this idea of things that are going to encourage kids to feel safe in your environment and to take those risks. Because otherwise they're not going anywhere. You're not going to get them to do much of anything because that fear of that public humiliation or backlash that they live with in their little bubbles. So this sign is up in a lot of our classrooms in high schools especially because we talk to kids about failing forward and about the idea of it's not a failure unless you fail to learn from it. So we have to take those opportunities and we have to move forward. For me, this becomes there's never a time that it's more important than after an assessment. I'm sorry, but I don't think that you should grade everything that kids do. I think the kids should be grading it for proficiency, for performance levels. Save you a whole lot of time. But the reality is that those kids that I talked about, those level 3 kids that scored so high, the only thing we did different in that classroom was self and peer assessment using the same rubric as the teacher did. We have one rubric, everybody uses it. Every kid can explain it, and when you walk in and listen to 7th graders argue about whether that was a novice high or an intermediate low performance, and the kids are saying, prove it, where is your evidence? I use all simple sentences all the time. Where is your evidence of a sentence fragment? That's a quote from 2 7th grade boys. I floated back to my office that day. Because when do you get, I get excited about that stuff because they're like, that's not an intermediate low answer. Yeah, it was. I used all simple sentences all the time. When kids can own that language, there's power in it. So I think of it as a little triangle. They have to fail. That's first and foremost. They have to have the opportunity to fail. So that means we have to ask them to do things that are slightly out of their ZPD, their zone of proximal development, right? It's that I+1. What's the plus? We have to stretch them. We have to give them a prompt. We have to give them an opportunity to do something that's slightly more than what they think they can do. And the beauty of proficiency and performance is that they're going to be able to perform at some level, and you're going to be able to rate it. And my favorite one is when you get native speakers. They're the best ones to outbreak themselves because they think they know it all. And then they go, oh my God, I thought I spoke Spanish. We thought so too, but there are different kinds of Spanish, and we're talking about academic Spanish. And yeah, you're great, outside of classroom, but there is an academic, there's a business level Spanish. So let's talk about what that looks like. Let's help you be able to code switch in that realm. Let's add that to your repertoire. So we have to encourage kids to make those failures, and then they have to have feedback, immediate feedback that's meaningful. Historically, we've always focused on teaching accuracy and mechanics, right? We conjugate the verbs, we do all the grammar, and communication was kind of like around the circle. We're going to teach you all these things so that eventually you can do this. Or at least these were the programs that I came out of. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's all important. It's just where we place it and how. However, there's this great book by Bill Van Patten called Making Communicative Language Teaching Happen. It's not new, and if you don't have it, you should invest. It is an investment. But it is the best book that I have ever read. Because of these aha moments like this. Communicative practice cannot be drilled. We do lots of drills in class. But that doesn't help kids become better communicators. So if our goal is to develop real-world communicators, then we have to offer them the opportunity to do more than drills. I think there's a place for drills, especially when there are patterns of errors that are being made repeatedly by the class. Completely appropriate. But that's not the only thing. We have to do more with that, and we can't lead with it. It's more of an RTI strategy in language learning, that kind of drill and kill, than it is the core instructional practice. Because we want kids going back to that principle of proficiency. Proficiency is all based on what kids do with what they know. So we have to shift our focus to making communication the core. So I saw on one of the slides this morning that was scrolling, Thomas had up this summer the question about, is communication something you do in your classroom regularly? Is that a practice in your classroom, communication? It's a big question. It should be the core of everything you do. And so if it is, then the question initially on the proficiency scale is, how well do you do it? Can I understand the words that are coming out of your mouth? To quote Chris Rock. Give credit. It's very good. But I mean, how comprehensible are kids? Because when you get novice kids, I mean, it really is about comprehensibility. Can you understand, bless their little hearts, what they're trying to say? Right? They're really good at lists. They're really good at words. They don't have a whole lot to say, and they can really only do what you taught them. So comprehensibility becomes the crux there. But then it remains an issue when you get into the intermediate low level, the intermediate mid, because the more information they have, the more creative they start to get. And when they get creative, Lord knows what's coming out of their mouths. Right? That's why you guys are so good. That's why if you read all the ACTFL stuff, it talks about to a native speaker, to someone not accustomed to dealing with language learners. Because we develop a whole code of how to understand the words that are coming out of their mouths to try and make sense of it. So the whole first part of the proficiency continuum is about, can you understand them? Because guess what? If they give you something and you can understand them, you have somewhere to start. Then you can start talking about accuracy. Then you can clean it up. Because once you get up to the upper end of intermediate and into advanced, it's all about accuracy. And that's huge. So begin with what your students can do, no matter what it is. Level 2 and level 3 teachers, I'm sorry. Some of your kids are going to come to you not prepared, or where you think that they ought to be. but where can you grow them to? So look at it as an opportunity to grow kids wherever they come to you. Can they produce that comprehensible output? And then where are they going to fall on the performance continuum or on the proficiency continuum? Everything we do has got to get anchored back to those things. We have to embrace the power of performance targets because they are very powerful. When they clearly define what we want kids to do, it defines how well we want them to do it. Then the kid doesn't have to get in your head and try and figure out what you want. They can really work towards hitting the target instead of making it a guessing game. Performance targets help us simulate real-world communication on specific targets in a way that's designed to yield a proficiency level. That's why they're important. So not only do you need to have a target for your class, how do you work towards that target intentionally every day of the year? My teachers talk about targets multiple times a day in the classroom. Most of them remind kids of what the target is right after they talk about the learning targets. Because we have these whiteboard protocols that they all have to do. I'm sure nobody else has to do that. It has a whole bunch of stuff for administrators, and it does have the one thing for kids is the learning target. And then the teachers embed in where are we working towards? What's our proficiency target? And what does that look like? So every day they anchor the class with where are we headed and what does that look like? So then by the time they get in the middle of class, I have teachers that have like hand signals with the kids. Like the kids are speaking and they're acceptable, and so the kids are like, oh, I have to level up, I have to level up. But kids figure that out. I mean, kids push each other. It's really a beautiful thing, but it's because we all share a language. And knowledge isn't proprietary, and it's not only owned by the teacher. It's because teachers have entered into this partnership with their learners to say, I respect you enough, I'm going to give you the target, here's where we're headed, here's how we're going to get there, but you have to do the work. I'm going to help you. It's about being the facilitator. We always talk about being the facilitator in the classroom. What does that look like? It looks like giving kids the targets, giving kids the language of performance and proficiency. Because honestly, the language of performance and proficiency is the academic language of a foreign language or a world language classroom. All your other classes are talking about the academic language of English and the academic language of math, right? Our elementary school kids now, everything is aligned. I'm doing algebra today, and I'm like, that doesn't look like algebra I ever did. I probably could have done that. But they're moving away from dumbing down or infantizing language, just calling it what it really is. Like, this is a precursor to algebra. This is a precursor to geometry. This is what it is in English. So when we talk about simile, metaphor, all that academic language that surrounds and all these other classes, our academic language is the language of proficiency and performance. It's the language of second language acquisition. It's that kids understand what input and output is, or are. They understand what a novice looks like, what an intermediate looks like, what an advanced speaker looks like, reader, writer. And ACTFL has been kind enough to give us examples in our languages, all for free. It lives on the web. So the things, the sweet, sweet people that do their OPI videos that we've all watched 100 times, right? You know, speak of the English? Our kids recite that because we share it with our students. I mean, that's what it's about. It's about bringing kids into this, understanding the mechanics of that metacognitive piece of learning, a language. So students have to understand, though, what that target means and what the neighbors look like. So if you look at them in families, if I'm aiming towards intermediate mid, what does that really look like? Can I bullet point that? They have to have input above the target language, above the level that you're aiming at. This is one of the reasons why teachers in our district get so mad at me, because if you're an intermediate high, you can't teach AP in our district. Because to get a 5 on the AP exam is loosely correlated to an advanced low on the OPI scale, and quite frankly, an intermediate high can't prepare an advanced low because there's not going to be enough input. So it's really about, we need our teachers with the highest proficiency teaching that AP class. Now they might also teach a level 1 and a level 2 class, because I think AP teachers should have to. Kids should have access to that teacher before they get to the upper levels. But they have to have input above the target level. So if you're targeting intermediate low, then make sure that the things that you're saying in class are intentionally at intermediate mid, intermediate high. They need those models. A lot of that is going to be the subconscious input that you're not even realizing. I had a level 4 teacher one year. She walked around, she taught 2, 3, and 4, and she walked around with a water bottle named Pepe. And so the kids would come into class, she also called herself La Reina. and all the parents called her La Reina. And there was no doubt that she was La Reina. So she would come into class and she would tell the kids, meet Pepe. If you talk, he will wet you. Because she would spray him. But she had somehow embedded every tense of Spanish language aligned to Pepe. And intentionally would use it for 3 years with her kids until finally the day came. It's my favorite day of the year in her room. Because the kids would walk in and she had whiteboards, like all along this one, and then she had made her own whiteboards all the way down this wall. Super long classroom. And the kids would come in and there was every tense laid out. And the kids were able, because of Pepe, the water bottle, suddenly were able to make sense of what she had been saying to them for 3 years. Like they knew all the tenses. They could explain what they meant. But it was because she was intentional about the language she used with her kids, and it was in her gitchy way with her water bottle. And yes, she really did kind of spray kids every now and then. Which my parents know. I mean, they didn't have complaints that I know of. But she was intentional in crafting the language that she used with her kids and being above where they actually were. So she didn't infantize her language. She was very clearly targeting higher level patterns of speech that she knew they were going to have to grasp moving forwards, so that it was in a way that they were comfortable with it and they felt comfortable and they were okay then suddenly when we started talking about wedding verbs and subjunctive in Spanish. But no one can perform if there's not a clear model. And that's just the reality. That's why we created TELL. There was a group of us, 4 of us, that were very tired of teachers asking what the model teacher looked like and waiting to get feedback until somebody came to their room to tell them what they did right or wrong. Teachers should be empowered to self-assess and to grow on your continuum, to set your own goals. You don't need someone else telling you what to do. You're adults and you're professionals. But if you don't have access to that model, if you don't have access to that information, you can't do it. And quite frankly, it's the same with kids. They want to be grown. They think they want responsibility. I keep telling my son, adulting is the dumbest thing you'll ever do. Stop trying to do it at 14. Because in time, you're going to have to do it, and there's no way around it. And I would love to go back to 14 and not have to adult some days, or most days. But if that model is not there, and they don't interact with it repeatedly and regularly, they're not going to make it. So we have to be intentional. We have to be conscious of what we do and how we do it. So yes, I'm saying teach your students the language of proficiency and performance. We take the first week of school every year. Because I don't know about you all, but in our district, the kids you see on the first week might not be the kids you see on the second week. While we work out schedules, and this year we had a whole new student management system and it was a nightmare. So we really just stopped trying to do instruction that was content related, because where people were with what classes and a new teacher versus an experienced teacher, it just created a lot of anxiety. So what we did though is we took the idea of saying, fine, we'll teach greetings, we'll teach goodbye, we'll teach procedures and rules, but we're also going to teach these things. So we're going to teach kids about proficiency and performance. I'm going to teach kids the scale. This comes right out of our curriculum guide. I'm going to make kids do performance tasks, intentionally benchmarked at certain performance levels. So we love the activity that we stole from Thomas Sauer's teachers about an alien, Marvin the Martian, lands in your city, sees a sign for a circus, and you have to describe a circus. The hiccup is that you put your kids in groups and they draw out of a hat a proficiency level. The only way that they can describe the circus is according to the guidelines of that proficiency level. So if they're novice mid, they can only make a list of words that align to a circus. And if they're novice low, they can get a couple words. Right? Whereas the group that gets intermediate low or intermediate mid is writing sentences and paragraphs about what a circus is. It immediately becomes, yes, in English. And it immediately becomes clear to kids about what that is. This is what I'm looking for, but in the target language. Because now they've experienced it. We make them do a Venn diagram with performance and proficiency. I mean, it sounds kitschy, but you know what? They need to understand what they have in common and what makes them different. And why we're going to focus on performance in our classroom, because that's what we have control over, is performance. And then we get into why learn another language, why is it important, where do they speak our languages. And we really, because we are a large urban environment, we really try to focus on where are places in the United States where you might find large groupings of populations that speak this language. So we use the MLA map. If you're not familiar with the MLA map, you can go in and put in a zip code and it'll tell you what languages are spoken in that zip code. And it's usually jaw-dropping to see what all is there. And of course it's based on census data, so we always tell our kids it's not everybody, but it's a good representation. But after this first week, and when they get into the upper levels, they're doing it in the target language. They're looking at samples of what an advanced speaker looks like instead of what an intermediate low speaker looks like when you get to 3 and 4. Right? But we're still having the same conversation because we're not getting away from performance and proficiency. Like that's going to stick with you from the time you start in our program to the time you leave us. And unfortunately, you may not ever see it again. But at least you know when you go to college, you know what you need to do to become a more proficient speaker when you get into those communicative classes. You know that you can go abroad and be okay. May not be great, but if you get separated, you can find some help. So again, I'm going to encourage you, set targets, even if it's just for your own classroom. If you don't have a target, you don't have a model, you can't move them forward. So some of the ways our teachers do this is they make bulletin boards and they make posters. The one on the left, they actually track the kids. So kids get either a number in some schools, in other schools it's their names. And the kids move based on their summative assessment. They get to move where they are across the board throughout the year. Then I had some teachers that are super creative with it, right? So I had one teacher that I worked with this summer who was like obsessed with llamas. So she made a shower curtain with Machu Picchu on it. And all of her kids got to decorate a llama. And so now they all, as they move up and she teaches levels 2, 3, 4, and AP. So she has all these kids on one huge shower curtain on her wall. What I love is that like when they get to AP and they get up to the advanced range, they get to be super llamas and then they get to choose a cake. Because there were only so many peaks of Machu Picchu. But I mean, the kids love it. I have a Puerto Rican teacher that has the cookies on a tree, and I have a French teacher that's got the Tour de France. And so they took streets out of Paris with traditional street signs, and they assigned the levels on the street signs, and as the kids move, they're on bikes. And they get to move their bike along. So there are all these visual representations of how we track performance and proficiency, but it doesn't let kids get away from it every day. I do have one teacher that dressed up. He is proficiency. Wah, wah, wah. You can see the levels he teaches. The kids love it though, it's really odd. But he, like proficiency will come out at various times of year. Like so if they're not on the right track, like he'll pop back up to do a refresher. And things like that. But I mean, here's an example of a high school teacher, a male high school teacher dealing with, pretty well-to-do kids at the school, and they just have fun with it. So be creative. Like, what are the ways that you can make it visible and viable and the core of what you do? Revisit your targets multiple times a day. Like if you're doing question and answer or kids are talking with their partners, be like, was that really an intermediate answer? What could you do to make that better? How can we do that? Things like connector words become very important very early on. Like we've intentionally started embedding these in our curriculum. We moved away from vocabulary lists and we moved in sentence frames. So now I really don't care how you fill in the blank of the sentence frame. I really want to see what you do with a frame. And then how do you link frames together? And then as they get smarty pants, they start pulling frames apart to make new frames. And things get messy, but that's okay because then they're creating with a language in a way, they're recombining language in a way that's novel and new, and they find it empowering. So I want to leave you with these 4 things to think about. When you talk about the characteristics of a can-do classroom, knowledge is shared. We have to move away from the idea that the teacher knows everything and has all the answers. Not that you would think that, but that's how kids often see us. Or maybe you. But things have to be accessible to students. Information has to be accessible. We live in a world where information is accessible. And if we don't teach kids about where to find information, from which places, then they end up on Google Translate, which is the bane of our existence. However, I will tell you, after having visited Japan last December, Google Translate saved my life on multiple occasions in Japan, being a non-Japanese speaker, because I could put in what I wanted to say in English and it would come out in Japanese and they read it. Not that I thought of that, but one of the young men in the hotel did. And I was like, great strategy. But, so there are uses for it, but not in our classroom. And here's why. But kids, they're going to resort to that. They're resourceful little critters. So if we don't teach them about where and when to get their information, we're going to end up with those sorts of problems. It has to be readily accessible. We do unfortunately deal with a group of kids that have what they want when they want it, information-wise. Instant gratification. Thank you, technology. So these are things like grammar walls. These are things like word walls. Like, how do kids have access in your room? Interactive notebooks is another thing. How do kids have access to the information they need so that they don't have to stop everything and ask you? Right? A grammar wall is really powerful because you can sneak things up. Like, ooh, what's that new poster? Oh, it's past tense. This is how you do it. Great. Okay, moving on. Right? I didn't just spend a whole class period talking about past tense. I just said, hey, I just want to draw your attention. Let one kid in your class figure out how to use it publicly in your classroom. Suddenly everybody's going to be using it because nobody wants to be left behind because they're competitive. But it was the idea that they had access to the information when that one student was ready to have access to the information because it was out there and it was available and it was shared. Is it safe to take risks? I can't stress this enough. You're language educators, you're not in your classrooms today because you feel like it's important for you to grow professionally. Like, you know how to do this. I'm hoping that today I'm pointing and maybe pushing on some hot button issues that maybe we haven't thought about because people haven't had the time to stop and think about it. We run day to day. Most of you have 150 kids during the day and you may even have some more at home. Right? So we go. That's what we do. We also have to make sure that everybody in our classroom grows. It doesn't matter where they start. Where they end is what matters. Where they leave you is what matters. Did you grow them? How much? How far? And do the kids understand that they grew? Because when kids, it's not even kids, everybody likes to be successful. I don't think anybody wakes up and is like, I'm going to be the worst teacher in the world today. I'm going to go rock that out real quick, right? Like, that's just not realistic. Like, nobody wakes up and wants to be bad at something. But we have kids that are told all day, every day that they're bad at stuff. And if you don't think that's true, hover outside of other classrooms on your planning period and just listen to the things that kids hear every day. It is jaw-dropping. And it's not because people are intentionally mean, it's because we're unconscious. We react instead of act. It doesn't make it okay, it just makes it kind of a reality of what we're dealing with. So really, investing in kids to say, I value you, I believe that you can grow, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So it's like giving them someone the fish versus teaching them how to fish. I'm going to teach you how to do this. So when you leave me, you have skills that you can use to be successful for the rest of your language learning life. Because language is something that you're going to continue to learn. So thank you. We have 2 minutes, so if there are questions, feel free to ask them. If not, please go to your sessions, and thank you so much for your attention. Have a great conference.